All right, looks like we're recording. Well, hello, Mr. Ippolito's and Mr. Han's students. This is Mr. Ippolito.
This is Mr. Han. How's it going?
Hey. Okay, so we decided to go ahead and go over separately, so we keep it out of the Zoom call. We decided to record separately the Alamo discussion questions, going over the answers. So what I'm doing right now is I am going to click share screen, and so you should now be seeing the Alamo discussion questions while still listening to our voices. So, Mr. Han, first of all, before we get started, what did you think of the movie The Alamo?
Well, I always loved that movie. What was it? When I first saw it way back in the day, I think it was actually on TV when I first saw it. And I was wondering what in the world's going on here. And then the thing about me and movies is that whenever I get brought into like drawn into a movie, after I finish watching it, I look up everything about it. All the information regarding that was presented in the movie. For in this case, the Alamo, I kind of went into. I think I went into my history textbook at the time. I think I was in. I'll be honest. I didn't see it until I was in like 10th grade or something. I think, yeah, I think it was 10th grade actually. And then so I went into my history textbook at the time, and then of course it was a European history one, so it wasn't really in there. So I'm thinking, oh wait, if it's not in Europe, then where exactly is it? And then went digging around some more, went online. What was it? Went through, I think it was like Britannica or somewhere around there. We started reading about the Alamo, and then I got really drawn into the whole Spanish-American War, the War of Texas Independence, everything, or not Spanish-American War, Mexican-American War, and the Texas Wars of Independence. And then it was just a deep rabbit hole for me from there. That's just what I end up doing all the time when it comes to movies like this. And the Alamo sure didn't disappoint.
Well, I love this movie, and of course I saw it for the first time like as an adult,
Mm-hmm.
and since then I have gone to visit the Alamo. I've been to San Antonio, Texas. I went with my
Mm-hmm.
family actually back in 2019, spring break
Oh
2019.
wow!
We went to Texas, and so much fun and so much history there. So, all right, well, Mr. Han, let's go ahead and we'll jump right in,
All
and
right.
we'll start with these questions because this is the answers are what the kids really want to hear. All right, so number one, why do you think Santa Anna called himself the Napoleon of the West? Well, I would say that when now we're referring specifically to the president of Mexico, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and it's unusual that you have both a military leader and a like a civilian or political leader at the same time. But he was both. He was the lead general, but he was also the president of the country at the same time. So I think if you now you haven't learned too much about Napoleon yet. We've talked a little bit about him. He was kind of a larger than life character. He really thought very highly of himself. He always tried to dress very nicely, and I think he was always worried. I think, from what I know of Napoleon, always kind of worried about what people thought of him. And so I think that was Santa Anna as well. I think he had a little bit of an inferiority complex, but at the same time, he always wanted to dress very nicely. You saw it in the movie. He was always, he was dressed in very fancy military attire. He was always, very impeccably dressed. And I think that he wanted to be maybe a conqueror. He thought of himself as a very strong leader, just like Napoleon did. Mr. Han, what am I missing?
What was it? I think he covered the vast majority of it. He was very. He was the military uniforms that the Mexican army was wearing at the time. They were very reminiscent of the French army during during the Napoleonic Wars. Very similar. What was it? When there was that one scene in the film where General what was it, when Santa Anna and his army captured a group of rebels. I forget what, I don't recall exactly what town or village that they captured them in Mexico, but then instead of sparing some of the prisoners, he straight up executed all of them.
Yeah.
And what was it? He said to his, I believe he said to his general, instead of something along the lines of, instead of letting these men run off and tell everybody it was fate that saved them, their loved ones will now tell everybody that it was Santa Anna that killed them. So
Yeah.
he's very just what was it? There's an air of arrogance about of him in that scene that it kind of reminded me of Napoleon himself, and
Yeah.
that he thought very highly of his actions there. But
Well,
yeah.
and ultimately, I think like Napoleon, Santa Anna, he ultimately gets tripped up by his own hubris. So
Hmm.
hubris, that's a really
Yeah,
good
that
vocabulary
is.
word. Hubris comes from the ancient Greek tragedies. There was in ancient Greek tragedies, the tragic hero would always have some fatal flaw, and one of the fatal flaws is that he was overconfident, that he thought that he was going to get away with it. And I think that that was, towards the end of the film, which is what happened in real life. Santa Anna kept pushing his men, pushing his men, pushing his men to chase Sam Houston. This was, of course, after the events of the Alamo, right? So kept, going after them, going after them, going after them, and his forces kind of kept getting strung along and like strung further out. And then Sam Houston took advantage of that, just like Wellington did, the Duke of
Hmm.
Wellington during the Napoleonic Wars. So the Duke of Wellington took a lighter, smaller force and ultimately would defeat Napoleon, just like, or would defeat Napoleon, just like Sam Houston with a smaller, lighter force of Texans ultimately would end up defeating Santa Anna. So not only did Santa Anna try to emulate what he thought were the positive traits of Napoleon, but ultimately he ended up emulating the downfall, the negative traits of Napoleon as well.
Hmm.
Okay. I think that we did justice to number one. So now we'll move on to number two. How were slaves depicted in the film? What do you think the filmmaker was trying to say about the treatment of slaves in Texas and in the South in general during this time? Um, I think that it's pretty clear. I think the filmmaker was trying to make a negative statement about slavery during this time.
Yes.
It is true that Mexico had outlawed slavery already. So something that it took us another 20 years, 30 years to do in the United States, Mexico had already done previously, when pretty much when Mexico became a country in the 1820s, they had outlawed the practice that was legal under Spanish control, the practice of slavery. Um, so there's that scene, very famous scene in the movie where it's towards the end, and the older, if you remember, the older slave tells the younger slave, hey, if they catch you, if the Mexican army catches you, you just say the words "soy
Soy
negro,
negro, no
no
disparo. Yeah.
disparo,"
Yes.
which means like I'm a slave. I'm black. Please leave me alone. Like I have no part of this. I was not like this is not my decision to be here. I am here against my will. So I think the filmmaker is he's definitely saying, what, for as much as we might see these people the Texans who fought at the Alamo as heroes, the fact is they were still slaveholders, they were still slave owners, they still practiced slavery, and so therefore, you have to, you got to balance your understanding or your beliefs with them, with also understanding that they were still. The reality was they still embraced slavery when Mexico had gotten rid of it, years and years earlier. Anything I'm missing there, Mr. Hunt?
I don't think so, sir.
Okay. So number three, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I think this was, if I recall correctly, this is the scene in the movie where Juan Seguin, uh, Juan is his first name, Seguin. I know it sounds like I'm saying once again, but Juan Seguin is the leader of the Tejanos, right? So it's important to understand the Tejanos were the Mexicans, but they were opposed to the Mexican government, right? So they were living in Texas. The Tejanos were living in Texas. They were Mexican, but they also disagreed with with Santa Anna, and they wanted to rebel against Santa Anna as well. But they were also kind of suspicious of the Americans, right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of that's why they use that phrase, the enemy. El enemigo de mi enemigo es mi amigo, I think was the quote. Like it had subtitles, I think, if I remember from the movie.
Yes.
So in other words, you know what? Santa Anna is my enemy, and the Americans, they also hate Santa Anna too. So we'll work together to conquer this, to defeat this common enemy. And while we are speaking of Juan Seguin, I think that it mentioned at the end of the movie, Mr. Han, like the fact that Juan Seguin, he actually did go back. Like he fulfilled his promise. Did it say that at the end of the movie?
Yes, it did.
He
1 year
actually,
after the Battle of the Alamo, he did go back to fulfilling his promise to the fellow defenders of the Alamo. Yes.
yeah, and to help give them a proper burial. And so he,
Hmm.
he did. He promised his friend. Well, I think they became friends. William Travis promised that he would come back, and so sure enough, he did come back. Give the fallen there at the Alamo proper burial. Okay, so really, this question it doesn't even ask anything factual about the movie.
No.
It's really just asking like, do you agree or disagree with this statement? So it's based on the movie, but this is up to you. So you answer it however. It's there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just whatever you think.
Hmm.
Okay, so number 4, Jim Bowie is telling a story in the bar with his friend. When he asks his friend why he didn't help him fight at the brawl in Natchez, his friend says, "You were in the wrong, Jim." Bowie replies, "That's when I need you the most." So he's telling the story of like a bar fight, and he's like, "Why didn't you back me up? You're my boy. Why didn't you help me in that situation?" And the friend is like, "Well, but you were in that particular situation. You were in the wrong." And he's like, "Well, that's when you need a friend the most. You need a friend the most when you are in the wrong, and you need that backup."
Hmm.
So that's what. Uh, Again, this is another one of those questions where it's not. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just curious to find out your response. Is this true about our own friendships? Right. So in your life, have you had a situation where you have been in the wrong, but you've needed your friends to back you up and to help you out, and has that, have you ever been in that kind of situation? Um, Ron, I'm trying to think if I have ever been in that situation before. I try not to find myself in any bar fights.
I
Uh,
haven't, I haven't been to a bar in years, so I couldn't tell you.
but obviously students haven't been to bars,
Mm,
shouldn't be going to bars either. But I'm curious to read what our students' responses will be about this, because
indeed.
yeah, for sure. Okay, number 5. Many refer to the Alamo as a quote lost cause. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew they weren't going to get help. They knew that they would most likely die. And so, in your opinion, was the Alamo a lost cause? Was the battle worth it, or did they truly die for nothing? And I think here it's just this is another matter of opinion. Like you
Yeah.
tell me whether or not you think it was a lost cause. Was there something like should it have even happened at all? Should they have even taken the stand, or should they have just retreated? Should they have just left and tried to save their lives? Um, they all died there. So the question is, did they die for a cause? Did they die? Were their deaths worth it, or were their deaths in vain, and did they die for nothing? So
Mm.
that's gonna be on you. And I would say when you answer that question, just make sure that you explain it. Okay, number 6. Why did Santa Anna keep waiting for Sam Houston? This is actually a question we can answer, Mr. Hahn.
All right.
And why did Sam Houston wait for so long? So Santa Anna waited. What was it, like 17 or 18 days? The siege at the Alamo.
Uh,
What
I
was it?
no, geez, I keep. I think was it 13 days?
Some number of days. This is totally Googleable. How long was the siege
Yeah, I
at
think it was 13 days, sir.
13 days? Okay. So yes, Google is telling me the same thing. You
Yeah.
were faster though. um,
The
Santa,
reason I remember that because they were carving in the tallies for however many days they were under siege.
yes, yes, and the tallies, those like tally marks, were actually at the very beginning of the film too.
Hmm.
The tally marks that were carved into the brick.
Yeah.
Um, so why did Santa Anna keep waiting for Sam Houston? I'm going to say that I think that Santa Anna was waiting for Sam Houston because he wanted to have like the once and for all knock down, drag out, like you come to me, Sam Houston. He was hoping that Sam Houston would. It was almost like it was a trap, right? Like he was setting the bait. He wanted Sam Houston to come because he had the upper hand. I think he had the military advantage there.
Hmm.
He had all of his forces all in one place, and I think that if Sam Houston were to come, then I think he just would have wiped out not only everybody in the Alamo, but would have wiped out all of Sam Houston's forces as well.
And
So the
that pretty
question,
much would have been all of Texas's military capacity at that point. Yes.
yeah, that was it. That was all that they had. The forces at the Alamo, plus Sam Houston's forces. That I mean, and there were like scattered militias here and there, but for the most part, that was going to be it. And then why did Sam Houston wait for so long? I think we referenced this a little bit in the Napoleon question. He was trying to spread, like stretch out those forces. He was trying to drag them out because the more that he made Santa Anna march, or Santa Anna's forces march, they're bringing all these cannons, they've got all these wagons, they have all these supplies, and so they just keep getting stretched out thinner and thinner and thinner until finally Sam Houston, and he made that Napoleon reference again. He's like, I'm looking for my Waterloo. Where is my Waterloo? Right? Because Waterloo was the same place where the Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon back in the time of Napoleon, which really wasn't that much before that. This was like 30 years earlier was when the Duke of Wellington defeated Napoleon. So I think Sam Houston, and again, Sam Houston, first of all, waited, did not go to the Alamo. Some people were really upset with him for not going and backing up the people at the Alamo. But Sam Houston he was a smart, like he had a really brilliant military mind. He knew what he was doing. Um, Sam Houston, ironically, during the time of the Civil War, Sam Houston is also going to tell his fellow Texans when they are getting ready to vote to secede from the Union. This is going to be another, um, 25 years after these events here. Sam Houston, always ever the wise man, Sam Houston. He's like, you know what? You can secede, and you can try to fight, and you can try to break away from the United States, but those people up in the north, they're patient. They are patient. They will wait for us. They have more people. They have more guns. They have more ammunition. They have more, like, they're better prepared for this than we are.
Mm-hmm.
So he was trying to warn his fellow Texans against getting into the Civil War. Ultimately, Texas and the South are going to lose the Civil War, but his wisdom was unheeded in the days leading up to the Texas seceding from the Union. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. That's further on in the. Okay.
So Sam Houston waited for more men.
Yes.
What was it? More men, and then to also
To stretch out Santa's forces, right?
Yes. Also the what was it? Also the perfect battle conditions.
Yes. Looking for his water.
In order to defeat Santa Anna's forces. Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Give Santa. Fantastic. All right.
Cool. Number 7, the filmmaker used several different methods for portraying Santa Anna as a real bad guy. Perhaps even worse than he was in real life. What were they? Whenever you're making a film, and especially if you're making a film about something, that existed in real life, you sometimes have to take liberties. Was Santa Anna really as big of a jerk as he was portrayed? Because that actor, I don't watch many Mexican films, but I understand that he's a fairly well-known actor in Mexico. The guy that they got to play Santa Anna. But first of all, I would say that he was cruel. Definitely depicted his cruelty. In one of the beginning scenes, Mr. Hahn, you referenced, where it was like show no mercy, execute, no, leave no prisoners, take no prisoners kind of approach, which that was true to life. That really was Santa Anna. I think he was, you see him yelling at his subordinates, at his, the officers that are beneath him, kind of dismissing them. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, which it doesn't advance the story at all, but there was the scene, if you remember, Mr. Hahn, where you see like that that young woman, she's maybe, I don't know, 17, 18, 19 years old. She's sitting on the bed.
Oh
She looks
yes.
she looks very afraid. She looked like she's looking like very uncomfortable and like, this is disgusting. And then, you just see Santa Ana closing the bedroom doors, and he has that real like sinister look on his face. And of
Hmm.
course, it's a Disney movie, so they're not gonna they're not gonna go any much
They're
further
not
than
gonna
that.
show that. Yeah.
No, 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 no. Of course not. But here's this like old man, like he's and this much younger woman, and you're like, oh, and you're kind of led to believe, oh, she really doesn't have much choice in the matter. She's really, this is not a good thing. So I think
Yep.
that was another. I think that was another very clever choice on the part of the filmmaker
Hmm.
to, just very, very, just a hint of like, oh, this guy's a jerk. Um, I like that bedroom scene. Anything else, Mr. Han?
The fact that Santa Ana, what was it? Every night, well, what was it? He would have the band play the music before they would bombard the Alamo with artillery.
Legueyo.
Yes,
Yes.
Degueo, yes. So the fact that he did that is just adds on stacks on top of the cruelty because I mean, yeah, to be kept up all night for all night every night for 13 nights in a row, it's that's very draining, not only like physically but also like psychologically as well. So it's
Yeah.
not really something that you want to do. I can see why he did it. It did give him an advantage in the very end, but then he already had so many advantages. What was it? I personally don't see any reason for him to be stacking on anything more on top of them. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's that.
It was almost like he was toying. He was toying with them. He
Hmm.
was, and I think it's unnecessary for his own, for his own men as well.
Right, right. And then another thing that I thought of was at the very end during at the very last battle, the Battle of San Jacinto, um, when the Texian army is advancing on Santa Anna's camp, and it doesn't, and it looks, it's become very clear that they're not being stopped. You can see Santa Anna actually on a horse without his jacket on, without his uniform on,
Yeah.
and then one of his subordinate officers sees him, and then he's getting out of Dodge. He's leaving there. He's not sticking around. And what was it? And then his subordinate officer just turns back towards the advancing Texans, just crosses his arms and looks at them defiantly as they come up and kill him.
They totally
Yeah,
just
yeah,
take him
that
down.
kind
Yeah.
of
So it's like there were other officers and other soldiers in the Mexican army who were very brave and who were,
hmm
they were going to face, they were going to face even in the face of sure defeat, they were going to, face it bravely, whereas he was turning tail like a coward and going to try to get out of there. Ultimately captured, of course,
hmm
by the Texans. But yeah, I agree with that. Um, Okay. And then finally, number 8, William Travis in his final speech at the Alamo says, Texas has been a second chance for me. Perhaps it has been so for you as well. I love that speech that he gives because here's William Travis. And again, how much of it is, how much of it is true and how much of it is Hollywood. I'd like to think that they try to make these characters as true to real life as possible, but
hmm
you definitely, speaking of trying to portray someone as a jerk, I think William Travis at first,
oh
at the
yeah,
beginning of the film, where he's abandoning his wife and his children, and uh, I think that he's kind of portrayed as not the best man
right.
in the beginning, but you see that character development with him. He
hmm
he becomes you see he becomes a better man, and ultimately in that final speech, um, I think you really you gain sympathy for William Travis, and you think in
Definitely.
the end, maybe he's not such a bad guy after all.
hmm
So again, this is one of those questions where there's no one right or wrong answer. When do we need second chances in life, and is there ever a point when someone doesn't deserve a second chance?
hmm
Um, I know that I have definitely been the beneficiary of second chances in my own life. Um, so it's nice to it's nice to get that grace. It's nice to nice to get it's nice when someone, decides to give you another chance. Um, and I'll tell a personal story. So it was 2003, 2002, 2003 school year. And I had I had been up to that point, I had been teaching on what was called an emergency credential back in the old days of teaching, Mr. Hahn. Uh, and you could, because they needed teachers so desperately in California, they were willing to like, you have a college degree and you're at least showing that you're starting to take credential classes. So you could back in the day, you could teach on an emergency basis.
Hmm.
You just show that you're taking one class a year. You just renew that one class. You
Wow.
just take you can keep renewing your emergency credential. So that's what I kept doing. And then finally, in the fall of 2002, I was teaching. This was the time I was teaching at La Mesa Junior High School, right here
Hmm.
in Canyon Country. And I took my one class. It was my first online class ever. I took a class online. I took it like in August or whatever, and so it's November, maybe early December, and I go to fill out my paperwork and get all, do the things I've done for the past few years now. And I contact the university and they say, "Oh, you failed the class." I'm like, "What?" "Well, you failed the class." So I'm like, "No, no, I don't think you understand. I'm like, this is me we're talking about. I don't fail classes. What are you talking about?" They said, "Well, contact your professor and find out what's going on." So I contacted my professor, and the professor said, "Well, I never got your final paper." Now, this is back in the early days of online classes.
Oh
This
yeah.
was, this was 18 years ago. So online classes weren't like they are today. Today, there's a lot of checking in, and there's threaded discussions, and there's constant interaction between the professor and the students, and well, student to student as well. Back then, you wrote like one or two papers, and that was it, and that was your
Hmm.
grade. And I think in this class, it was like literally, it was like one paper, and he didn't get my final, and so I failed the class. And so I go back to the university. I'm like, well, okay, I've do my final paper, but the problem was there was a 90-day appeal policy at the university,
Oh.
and so the class finished like September 1st. So like October 1st, November 1st, December 1st, I had missed the 90-day cutoff by like 4 or 5 days, and they,
Yikes.
and they they were not budging on it. They said, "Hey, you can take the class all over again and pay another $1,000 to take this class all over again." And so I'm like, "Okay, well, I guess I've learned my lesson. I guess that's what I have to do." So I go to the school district and I'm like, "Okay,
Hmm.
well, listen,
Hmm.
my bad. I can take this class. They're going to offer this class again in February. So I'm just going to take the class all over again in February. This time I'm going to take it in person. I didn't trust online classes at that point. So I'm going to take the class in person. Like this is going to be fine, right?" And they're like, "Well, actually, your emergency credential, we can add on. You have this 30-day permit that we can add on, but January 24th, you're going to be out of the classroom." I'm like, "Wait, what? No, no, they can't. No, don't you know who I am? Like, I'm a really good teacher. My students like me. The parents like me. What?" And so I had to deal with the reality that there was no way around this. They were not offering the class any sooner. So I was going to, January 24th, I had to write a letter to the parents, to all of my parents, the parents of all my students. And I had to like get in front of my students and say, "I am going to lose my job for 6 weeks because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Like, I need to learn a lesson, learn a lesson from me." Um, and so I was out of my classroom for 6 weeks. They had to get a sub for my classes, and it was during that time that there was a brand new junior high school opening up across town, and I got a call from the principal who was the school hadn't even opened yet,
Hmm.
and so he said, "Hey, I heard really good things about you, and I'd like for you to be my ASB director so we can start the school, and we can we got to pick a mascot, we got to pick school colors, we have to start school culture and get all this going." And I said, "Well, you have to understand, I don't have a credential right now. I don't even have a job right now." And that principal, who his name was John Crinkle, he was the principal at a brand new school opening up called Rio Norte Junior High School, and he said, "That's okay. I know you're going to take care of it. I know you're going to get it all done, and it'll be great. We'll get it. it'll all happen. I believe in you. I have faith in you. So that was an example for me of, and so anyway, just to finish that story, I did. I was the first person in class. I was sat up front every day, like took notes. I got 100% A plus in the class, and I was finally able to return to my job at La Mesa and finish up the school year. March, April, May, a little bit of June, and then that school year was over. And then it was that following fall. I had someone was willing to give me a second chance, and I was able to start up the brand new school, Rio Norte Junior High School. So that's my second chance story. Okay. Anyway, they
All
probably
right.
could. They hopefully they. I don't know how many of you stuck around for the rest of that story because it had nothing to do with your homework. But I just like telling stories as my students already know. Okay. So, Mr. Hahn, is there anything else that we need to talk about when it comes to the Alamo discussion?
I do not think so, sir. I think we covered the vast majority of it.
Okay, very good. Well,
Whatever, yeah, in that
yes.
case, whatever students, if they can't get their answers from here, then they can definitely ask us during class.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and click stop share
Hmm.
and back to us. Okay. Mr. Hahn, unless there's anything else for this recording, I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on the record button. Anything else we need to add?
Don't think so, sir.
Okay. So to all of our students who have tuned in for this recording, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye and hope you enjoyed all of our storytelling, mine in particular on the Alamo discussion questions. Thanks. Have a great day.